got my survey license, and I left for a 4-year gap where I did some private surveying and I even like worked with Lisa Campbell and Doug over at DEA, but for just a little bit of a summer. And then I came back to the state with right-of-way engineering with Scott Morrison, and a few years after that, I learned a lot from that group. And then we went to decentralization. So the regions and the consultants were going to start writing the descriptions. And so we put together the manual. Scott, me, and a guy named Dave Suderman. Suderman was his last name. Shannon Suderman. And we put the manual together so that we could make consistency with the way we write descriptions. And so then I worked eventually to today I've been on this right-of-way engineering team. It's the best group in the state. Sorry, Audrey. And it consists of Mike, which is the best part about it, Mike Fallert, and then I'm his kind of like his team. So there's only 2 of us. That makes it good too. Anyways, so I'm going to go. This talk is about the right-of-way descriptions, and I'm going to go over a lot of stuff that Mike kind of has already mentioned, but I'm going to do it kind of from the perspective of a right-of-way description writer and what I would do to write descriptions. And then as I go through it, I will have that mentality. And then that way, a lot of you aren't right-of-way descriptions or description writers, or but it's good to know their mindset. So, but then some of you are, and so it's good to know your mindset too. But anyways, I set it up with this, it's not a PDF, it's just a PDF, and I'm just going to go through it. But I also, anytime I'm doing right-of-way engineering descriptions, I always load the manual, even though I kind of wrote a lot of the this part of it, the description part. I still refer to it even today when I'm writing the description. So I always have it loaded up. And as I go through this talk, I will kind of go back and show you where I look for things. So then you know kind of mind to our madness and how to do it. You probably do this too, though, you description writers. Anyway, so this is about right-of-way descriptions. So I'm just going to go over these slides. You know, basically, our descriptions are really important. We've consistently wrote them. If you looked at our descriptions from way back, just like Mike said, all the way to today, we wrote them pretty consistently. And the effective description is best. This is from Evidence and Procedures for Boundary Control. It's best to use a minimum of terms. The writer who is applauded is the one who condenses but omits nothing essential, who creates no conflicts or is clear. And that's the case with all writing. We want to be as concise, but we don't want to miss anything, and we don't want to create ambiguities. Also, there's suggested reading, and you can do this if you want, but I would suggest the description writers to review all these. They probably already have, but it's always good to go back to them. But there's some suggested reading. Now, the thing that's important to understand about this is about description writing is that's just one part of the deed. The deed there's all the statutorial types of deeds, but the deed is made up of a type of deed form, and it's got conveyance language in the front of that, and it calls out the grantor and the consideration and the grantee, and then it has a description. But most ODOT descriptions, there's some of them that aren't this way, but we usually refer to in the deed to an Exhibit A. And then in that deed, they go over conditions and covenants and restrictions and easements, and then they go over the signatures, and then they get to that Exhibit A, and then they have a county stamp at the end. That's how you know what, because a description that isn't, or a deed that isn't filed is no deed at all. A deed has to be recorded. So anyway, so this is the part that a description writer deals with, and that's their bailiwick. All this other stuff is the bailiwick of really a lawyer. So our right-of-way people are in charge of that, and DOJ, like Mike said, controls a lot of those languages, and that's a lawyer. You might be a surveyor and a lawyer, so you could do the whole thing, but this part is only about that exhibit part, the description. And then here's all, this is from evidence and procedure boundaries. This is all this of what when describing land, what's desirable for a description. You know, it contains a title identity. It's not going to interfere with the other senior rights. It should be written so that either at the present or in the future date, it can be located by a competent surveyors. All surveyors are competent, I'm sure. It should, and if they're not, the board and the lawyers hold them to it. It should not contain words capable of alternate interpretations, like ambiguities. It should be contain measurement data sufficient to describe an area of land that closes, and it should be based on a recent survey. And here's just, this is background stuff, but when writing descriptions, there's some rules that you could follow for construing descriptions if they, this is when they're doubtful or there's no sufficient circumstances to determine it. But that's if the description's doubtful. Now even if it is doubtful, we use these different things to be able to determine what description is referring to and what it's actually describing. And this is the way we get away, because once it's a deed, it's the deed, and unless it can be proven that there's a error in it, you know, it's going to hold. So, but this is, if there's ambiguities in it, this is what we use to kind of figure out, what a surveyor uses to figure out ambiguities. I'm not going to go over that, but I'll just go over this. But you can read these. We're going to have all these things on the internet. In fact, I just want to show you quickly. You know, this is our website. This is right-of-way engineering website. It's part of engineering automation. And down here, there's manuals and guides and tools. So that right-of-way engineering manual is right here. You could get that there. And there's all these other stuff online. But our training material, this is from before. We might upload this class series too in here. And that's where you would get it. So all these talks will be on there. There's also some different forms to go, or I might go over this again later. Anyway, okay, and this is the thing about what is the description of real property for purposes of recordation. This is part of our ORS's 93.6. And so it's got all this stuff that we have to do if we're going to record it needs to be coincident with the boundaries thereof, or lots and blocks, and additional names, or by partition recording, and by boundaries thereof, by meets and bounds, or reference to book and page. You know, all this stuff of ways you can write a description. One of the things I wanted to note, though, and this is, Mike noted this before, you can't really describe it by tax lot, and this is where it shows it in the law, because it's going to be inadequate, because those change at the whim, I would say, of the drafters over at the city, or whoever has a description. Not the city, but the county. Anyways, so that's that law. This is all kind of background information. Also, I'm going to go over this quickly. This is about coordinates, and Scott put this in from before. But basically, I'm going to go to the end of this and say, ODOT does not prefer us to use coordinates in the legal description. That's really all you need to know. But you description writers can refer to that statute and read through it. It's always good to refer to go over things again and again to remember. Now, this is how our descriptions basically are structured. And the other thing I want to show you in the manual, because I'm going to do this, is our manual is structured a certain way. But in this manual, in phrases is the one I go to a lot. And in that phrases chapter, I show just a generic description, and I kind of have an outline of how that description would go. And then after that, there's different phrases as you go through the description of how we like to see them written. So a lot of times I will be going into the manual at this point to see, oh, how did I write that? And then it's just kind of in order of how you write it. And so that's what I would do as I'm writing the description. But this is a really good chapter to review. And I like to open it up like this, where you see the pages and then you have the, is this not, that's not bookmark. Yeah, that's bookmarks, where you have the bookmarks labeled. This is a PDF. So anyways, and so you can go back to the cover really fast, or you can go to different places. They also have, you know, pages, but I think this is better because then you can get around the manual. Another thing I wanted to show you about the manual is, like, let's say you wanted to find out about areas. The quickest way I found to use the manual is just type in areas, and you can, what the hell happened? Whoops, sorry, you guys. And then you can just go through and look all through the manual and see where you can find out about areas or whatever topic you're looking at. And then that's the way I find in the manual how we like to do things, you know. So I just wanted to show you that. But let me go back to our topic. So the parts of description, our descriptions are written a certain way. There's a caption, there's the body, there's qualifying clauses, and there are augmenting clauses. Basically, it's all that. So the caption is just basically saying, this is where we are in the survey land. So this is we're in a section, we're in a county, or a city, we're in this state. And so that's just the general ideas of where this piece of parcel we're going to describe is in. And it doesn't get into the meat of the parcel yet. It's just saying this is generally where it's at. Then you get into the body. Now the body is what defines the parcel you're describing. And that gets to the particular land and locality of it. And that's where there's a lot of bounds talking. Like we bound it by the description, I mean the vesting properties, D. We bound it by lines. We bound it by other properties we could. And then, so this defines pretty much the whole description. But then sometimes we want to do a qualifying clause. We want to say it's whatever's in the body, but we want to include some other stuff that's not included in the body. That's adding to the body. And then you could also have augmenting clauses where, I'm sorry, the qualifying clauses where we probably take something away from the body. And the augmenting clauses where we add something to this body we just described. And these are, typically we do all the description and define the property we're talking about, the parcel we're talking about. And then these are at the end, right before the area statement. Or it also could be before the coordinate, the system it's in, the basis of bearing. Let's go on. Okay, so there's lots of different kinds of descriptions. Our typical description that we write, because the ODOT's property is mainly corridors. So we usually write a strip description with an alignment in a strip. But there, you could do a perimeter. Sometimes we write the perimeter descriptions when we're talking about land that's away from the highway, that's like when we bought some rock quarries, we'll do a perimeter. or you can do bounds. You know, in some ways, everything's bounds, though. A strip is a type of bound. Anyway, and then also there's references to the the main system of adequate parts. You know, the government property, how it was originally uh, put together, um, sections. You know, and then you can do combinations thereof. You know, you can look in boundary bound. You can look in boundary control and legal principles to figure more out. Now, this is just like Mike showed. This is a file description, and this is another thing I want to show you from the manual. There's a certain form we have, and I'm going to go to the cover. Now, this is in that chapter descriptions, and if you go to the end, you'll find this is the form you'd use for the seed file for a description. Now, I brought one up. Here it is. And this is what it looks like. There's 2 pages. And I always use this to start out a project. I'll do a generic one, and then I'll copy this and start writing my descriptions. Then I'll just copy them again and to change them. But this is set up with an addendum, the old style of addendum, and this is the exhibit part. Now, one thing I want to show you in this file is in the exhibit part, there is a chart in here that's a cell chart. And it's best to use this because then you can just easily go into cells to put your different station offsets. And then there's also this little end thing. It's best to keep that in there. You can get rid of some of these lines, but I would keep a line and that, because that makes this other thing work out, this page thing. So just realize that. Now, when I work on this, I always use this copy as my generic. And then when I get to a point where I want to create the addendum or the exhibit A, I will go and I will say File, Save As in Adobe, and then I will save the whole thing, and then I'll get into that Adobe and I'll get rid of the, you know, the one page for the exhibit, that's for the exhibit, and I'll get rid of the other page for the addendum. Now, the thing about this addendum, and contractors could do this, and I just always use this as the addendum, but you could also use that other page we gave to you. I can find that in the manual, but I just fill this out. But then when you get to writs, and this is for our people usually, because I don't know if contractors can get into writs. But, a minute. When you get into, oh boy. Oh well. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep, we can still hear you, Paul.
Okay, good. Okay, so when you get into writs, I don't have it loaded, so you can just pull off of this to put into writs. And this is the addendum, and this is the style that we have. Mike went over this with you already, but usually it has a file number and a drawing that it's coming from, and the name of the company or the writer and his company. ODOT people just say the writer name in ODOT, and then a date. Notice on the exhibit, we also have a date. This stuff is similar, but we don't have the writer's name. They'll sign it with their stamp. And ODOT wants all these descriptions that are written to have a stamp. Now, legally, anybody can write a description, but we want surveyors to write our descriptions. Anyway, that's one of our standards. And so they will stamp it. But this date's important. Now, when I usually work on things, the date I put in there is the date I just start writing descriptions. And then I always leave it like that. until, and even when and all my descriptions are that same date, so that when I ship them and I put them in RITs, it all has one date. It doesn't matter, but it just all has to be one date. And then if there's a revision, I'll change that date for that revision to the new revision date. Now, the thing is, when you guys are having these reviewed, especially the contractors by region, it's not the official one yet until you're ready. And then once they put it into RITs, though, it's the official first version. And that'll all, usually, if you send some of them, or if you send them all in, they will all have the same date for that first round, or they might have, you know, first date for one bunch you send in, and then for another bunch you send, and then you would change it on the revision. Anyway, we'll get into that later. But let me go. You guys just be patient with me here. Let me go back to my thing just to make sure. Yeah, notice here, this addendum part isn't going to be recorded. So the part that's going to be recorded is the exhibit. That's why I split them up into two different PDFs. And this is mainly just metadata that's going to go into RITs eventually. And then in RITs, I just want to go there. I don't know if you guys are supposed to be able to see this, but I'm right now. So this is like a property in RITs, and this is the legal part of it. And I'm just going to go to file 2. Anyways, when we're in RITs and we do all this stuff, we will generate an addendum. This one, the addendum has been generated, but what that does is it generates this addendum to look pretty much the same as we had up on our screen there. Oh, you guys can't see that. But it goes over the same stuff, and it pulls all this stuff. And this access control language, it pulls from the part of RITs that the right-of-way specialist puts in there. The description writers aren't in charge of this anymore, because like Mike said, we don't want to play telephone and then get it wrong. And also you should be at your meetings you get together for the layout meeting. That should all be established by then, and people should know what each file's going to have. But looks pretty much. This was a generated addendum. I think I generated it, but it pulls all the stuff in, so it looks basically like that other, like this agenda that I say that you should fill out. But it's going to be popped into RITs, so you really don't need this agenda, but whoever inserts it into RITs can pull the information off of this and put it in the RITs. Okay, let me see here. Oops, sorry. Okay, so that's the file addendum. And that, like I said, the addendum has all that on top of it. And also in the addendum on the other side, there's this stuff. Now, what we like to do is we like to have at the top of these addendum, this is the section of highway that we're on. You can get that from the right-of-way map that we got our information from, or the prior one even, but that's the section. That's usually what the name of the job is too. That's all official, the way they name jobs. So you want to have the official highway section name, and then you want to have the highway, and then you want to have the Polk County, and then you want to have whether it's non-throughway. Now that's a complicated process. That non-throughway, Mike talked about it before, but really it's it's we put them in this addendum because when we send this for approval to the commission, they wanted to see that, and they wanted to see that because there was the throughway thing was a act of Congress that was generated and way back, and it's the way they did access. But it wasn't for every highway; it was only for a few, and it was at the time they did that act that they measured that 10 spaces, 10 commercial or driveways along the thing made it a non-throughway. And so if you need help with this, you can always contact Mike or me to
Or you can
determine.
show them where it's at. Show them where it's at in the manual too,
Yeah,
if you want, real quick.
So here we are at the manual. Now watch this. I'm going to go to find, and I'm going to look for, what was it we were looking at, Mike?
Throughway.
Throughway. I'm sorry, I'm kind of, so this is the fast way of looking for it. So there's throughway system. So I'm going to go right to that. Now, here's the whole idea about throughway system. But what I wanted you to see, this is kind of some of the, let me go to this, because I'll just go to this. So this is how you determine a throughway. This is really fun. For one thing, I'll just tell you, not all highways are throughways. It's only these. And so if your highway that you're along is kind of near one of these, which they're all labeled, you would go to that map. Let's just say it's along 18. So 18 is this one. It's the Willamette Highway. Now in this file, you can click to that. It goes right to the straight line chart for Highway 18. And notice that it's the only page. Sometimes there's multiple pages per highway. So then you'd go through along there and you try to figure out, let's say it's in Pleasantville. Well, Pleasantville is all throughway because see, it's not filled in. If you're in Oak Ridge, if any of your project touched this station to that station and along this highway, it would be accepted. It wouldn't be, it would be a non-throughway.
Yeah, it would be called, yeah, it'd be called a non-throughway, which meant it had, yeah.
But the only thing, I kind of said that wrong. What it is if your whole project was in this area, it would be a non-throughway. But if any part of your project was in the throughway part, then it would be considered a throughway. That's what I was going to say. Your whole project would have to be in this area in order to be considered a non-throughway. If any of your files you're describing are in the throughway part, then it's a throughway. Okay.
Right. And it has to do with access control kind of rights at the time, basically, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But well, it's kind of that. It's really has to do with that throughway law, and the only reason we have it still is because that throughway law, it was the bailiwick or whatever of the commission to determine where throughway was, and they want to see whether any of this project is on their throughway system. But it's really kind of stupid because nowadays things have changed so much. I mean, there's probably 10 properties on all these things. But we have to go by, in order to call it a throughway or non, you have to go by the time of the act. So it's kind of a weird thing. I hope eventually, you might talk to right-of-way people, they might know more about, or the people that give these project files to the commission. But I think that's the only reason we have to put that in there is because the commission wants to know Anyway, I'm going to go back to the topic. Anyway, and then we like to put after that in the addendum, we like to put yeah, okay. We like to put the vesting deed owner who we're buying the property from, their name, and then we like to say if there's only one parcel, we don't really say anything. But if there's several parcels, we'll just list out whatever. Like if there's 3 parcels, we'd say this, just parcels 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and then what you're going to have in this addendum. But this stuff will be pulled. If you know it, you can put it here. But up here is just the major control phrase, access phrase. This one is control the highway. And let me show you in the manual where that is. I'm just going to look up access. Access key phrases. Okay, so there's all these access key phrases, and these define all of them. This is the place to go to look at that. But most of that's supposed to be determined by the access control specialist and the project team. And that'll be pulled over from the, I think in RITS, it'll be pulled from the, just the agents page. But if you know it, you could put it in this temporary addendum, but then whoever loads this up to RITS will just generate an addendum and it'll pull it from the right spot. It's best just not even to put any access information in, but unless you know that you're supposed to buy access, there's new access that needs to be bought in your description, then what you're going to do is your first parcel out is going to be access. And it's just going to say that. But we'll
Hey,
get
Paul,
to that.
Paul, can I add in here something real quick?
Yeah, go.
You know, we talked about this, and especially like with consultants and that, sending that in. You know, if you're worried or concerned about some of that on there and you're sending stuff in, you could probably even put a draft watermark or something on your addendum page so that you know that it doesn't get directly loaded. That's probably a possibility. It's not something we have in writing or teach, but if there's parts of it you're unsure of, but you put in, you could potentially do that.
Yeah. But you also should know, you also should know, talk to your right-of-way agents, because they're supposed to know what they're wanting to be purchased. And if there's new access needing to be purchased, if the project says we need access in this area, and we don't have any, or we are going to change what access we're going to get from what they had before, we need to have an access. The first parcel you describe needs to be an access parcel. And I'll show you later what that looks like. But basically, it's describing their whole property, because access is like Mike said, a stick of their rights. You know, if they're along our highways, they have a right to get onto our highway unless their access has been bought or controlled. So that's what we're doing when we buy access, is we are buying and affecting their whole property, their whole property's right for getting onto that highway. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll restrict their access when we do control the highway. We will restrict their access along our highway right away, but we'll let them get on somewhere else, like on a side road or something. We can't totally restrict someone's access to driving into the world, you know. So if they don't have, if we block out their property completely, we really can't do that. So we have to figure out a way to make sure they can get somewhere. But sometimes they have a back access to a you know, back street or whatever. So let me see here. So this is the access key phrase that will be gotten there. Then the other thing below this key phrase is going to come in these parcel impact notes. Now what that means is if there's something that's special about a particular parcel you're describing, like it overlaps with another parcel, another temporary parcel, let's say, or it's, you know, sometimes that happens with our permanent easements. They will be part of other permanent easements. Like for instance, the best one I could think of, like Mike mentioned before, is the sign easement. Sometimes we only want the sign easement to be where the sign is. And we want to have everywhere else be a work easement. So those are overlapping easements. So then in these parcel notes, you need to say, well, so much of the parcel 3 lies within parcel 2, or all of parcel 3 lies within parcel 2. And it's just defined for the appraiser that that parcel we're buying is affected by another parcel. So that would maybe devalue it, or, you know. So anyway, so another one that we would note about is, for instance, like if there's a building that's existing and we're going to leave it in there, but we want to, if that building ever goes away, and it's in the area of, like, let's say a permanent easement for slopes, but we're going to let them have the building, but so we'll mark around the building on our maps, and in our description, though, we'll still describe our parcel going through the building, but it'll be false called through the building. And then in the deed, they want to know about that, because they might say, well, in the case that the building goes away, then that easement, that permanent easement for slopes, takes over in that area, and they can't bring a building back into it. Sometimes we'll just let their building stay there until we go through.
Yeah, and this can actually work too with some of your temporary easements and stuff. If you're unsure of exactly where the wall is or different things, you can straight line across and say so many square foot of existing building lies within parcel 2 or 3, you know, except they're from existing building, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I just want to show them in here, in the appendix, there's a special, let's go to cover, we go to this appendix, and then right here, there's a special one that's about building encroachment, just to let you know. And you can read through this on your own time, but it goes over that whole idea of what to do in case of a building. But that's where you could find it, in the appendix. Since I'm here, I'm going to go over some of these other appendix things. This is a really good thing for you guys to go through, and I would especially recommend reading through that, you know, that thing when Mike talked about approved easement list. That's what's in this thing, and you can get a copy of it right here if you go there. Okay, and then also I would suggest reading through especially 2 of these things when you're talking about writing descriptions. Let me see. Description wording in Appendix F. I would have you go read through these because they go over special things about things we don't like to see and things we like to see in a description. For instance, you should always write on a line at a point, never at a point on a line. Another one I always see is this one here, this citing the center line of the state highway in the description, use the phrase the center line of the relocated highway You don't want to say the relocated center line of the named highway. What I want to go over the word relocated. What we mean by that is not anything to do with the recovery of the alignment. That's the center line is recovered, that the highway is relocated. And so when we say relocated highway, what we mean is that we've changed the highway some way with this description. We've we widened it, or we added to our highway corridor. So when we say relocated to a, we don't ever say relocated center line, because we don't do that. We recover center lines, but we relocate highways. And the reason we put it in there is just to make sure people are aware, because our highways are changing all the time, and there's sometimes several different center lines. Some of the north side of the highway is described off of one, and the south is described off of another. And so what we're doing when we say relocated highway is we're pointing right, that's why your maps are so important. We're pointing to that particular center line we're talking about at the time of this project when it was relocated and changed. Anyway, I just thought I'd add that. But I want you guys to, on your own time, to read through Appendix F and Appendix, or this is still Appendix F, because it has a lot of key ways of writing and description, and it has some really important things. You know, when we made this manual, basically, right-of-way engineering centralization, we took, everyone had their own manual when we were a central unit that they had for a working manual, and we just kind of threw them all together and combined them, and then and that's where we got a lot of these key phrases, because it was just a way to perpetuate the way we've always done things. And I know that the way you've always done things isn't always the right way, but in this case it is, because what we're trying to do is make it so that our descriptions are consistent through the years, and therefore you can hold to them, they never change, and a lawyer can't get on us about errors. So all this stuff is not from me, it's from our past, the way we like to write things. Anyway, so where was I? Okay, so you want to define different things about a parcel if there's anything. Those are called impact notes. If there's overlapping and all that. Okay, so then also in our, this part is putting the addendum because we eventually fill something like this out in the writs, and we talk about the coordinate system, and usually this is tax lot maps. This, you know, our right-of-way map is our tax lot map, but this is the tax lot map that everyone knows of that the counties use, and so we wanted to get. Usually it's to the 16th, but you could do it to whatever they are, wherever that parcel is, in a section in the tax lot map. Oh no, that the second one is the tax lot map. The first one is just where it is in the PLSS, Public Land Survey System. Okay, we usually do that by Alga Part, and then the other one we do by the tax lot map. And so everyone knows where it's at. And that's information that's put into it. Okay, then this remainder, you know, like I said, like we said before, this remainder usually is in square feet, and it's so that the appraiser usually can have an idea of how much of the property we're buying compared to how much the property is left. And we always put more or less whenever we put an area in, even on our addendum sheets, but especially in our description, we always put a more or less, because like I said, the land that we're describing is ODOT's land, and it's usually a corridor, and it's sweeping through and affecting all these other properties. But we don't do, and this is statutory too, the government doesn't have to do surveys of all the side properties and all their properties. We just kind of get all their descriptions together, and we put it together, and it's more of a picture. but it's generally accurate, but not, it's not been surveyed except for our part. And so that's the way we describe it, and we'll show you that later. And the way we define areas is we do it with more or less, because we haven't surveyed their properties, and so the lines that we've drawn for them are more pictures compared to accurate surveys. But ours is accurately surveyed. So access control notes. Now that'll be popped in from the agent's thing when it gets into writs too. And then down here for prior files is the last thing. And the only thing we do is we put now we don't do much description about this. We just put the file numbers. Now, most files will have one main number, and they might have this other RW number. That was just two different folders. One was a working folder, and one was the major folder. And that was just an old system they had. But on the maps, you're going to notice when we go back and what we call deed recording. Well, actually, I'm sorry. That's something. All these files will be shown on the maps, and usually the only reason we put prior files for a couple of reasons. Sometimes there's access control language in it that we want to make sure that they know about. Also, sometimes we purchase their purchase a strip already from them, and when we write a description, we want to call out that file and say, except they're from that piece that we've already purchased. Sometimes their property used to go out, or their property doesn't have that because they never changed their deed, and we call out their deed and it's bounded by their deed. But we also want to, if we've already bought a piece of their property, I'll show you this later, we want to negate it out of the survey and not include it. So that would be another reason to put a prior file in there. And so this, when you want to know about access control, if you guys ever want to know, it's really the project manager, right-of-way project manager, and also the project team and their access control specialist that's supposed to determine this. So, okay. And then you get to the Exhibit A. Now, our exhibits are such that, like Mike has even said, we define whatever, and you need to talk to the agent. Sometimes you have to split these into two files or sometimes two parcels, but we usually define all the parcels we want to purchase from the property, from the vesting property. And usually we have all the fees up front, and then we have the permanent easements, and then we have the temporary easements. Sometimes the first one ever, if there's any access being bought, is access, and access is a type of fee. It's one of their bundle of fee rights and all. And then there's the fee. Anyway, okay, and this is the part of this. The addendum we're not going to have in the deed, but this is the part that's going to, the exhibit that's going to go in the deed. So that's why it's signed. And all at the top, you know, when we come to these later and look at them, the recorded copy, we can tell, because we put this, we can tell what file number it was, we can tell what drawing it came from, and we want to know the date of the thing. This will be in there too, that is in Exhibit A. So that's in the header of everything. And then we're going to do those key titles to the description, to the parcel, whatever it is. If there's multiple parcels, you put parcel 1, parcel 2, parcel 3, and then you dash, and then the spaces, and then you'll put the fee. So, and whatever it is. Okay. So then, in a description, the normal writing of a description, the caption comes first. And basically that's just, you say a parcel of land and say where it's lying. And usually you'll call out the latest subdivision that it's been. Like this one was a DLC, in the DLC. And that's in a township range and in the county, Polk County, Oregon. Sometimes if it's in a city, we'll say the city. And then after the parcel lying in, we also say it's a portion of a particular property described in a particular deed. Now this is a kind of a bounding call too, by the way, this second portion, because we're bounding it by this deed. So that's why we can describe with these false calls outside of the deed, because we bounded it by the deed. So anything that's outside of the deed, but we do those false calls outside of the deed because we don't want to miss any part of their property. Okay. And when we call out a deed, we always call out the grantor, the recording date, the document number. Now, if in a deed we're calling out a particular, let's say this deed that we're calling out, the vesting deed, has 2 parcels, but we want to only hold it to parcel 1 of that deed. That's when you do that language that Mike said, that portion of that property designated as parcel 1 and described in that bargain itself, because we don't want them to confuse parcel 1 with the parcel we're just describing, but it's the parcel 1 of that deed. So that's it. When you want to bound it by the parcel of a deed, then you do that designated as language. And also in that, we say that document number and the county, whatever county recorder's thing. You know, we put together a listing of all the different counties and how they like their deed calls to be written. I think that's in the manual too. I might show you that later. I need to get going on this. Then in the body, we finally get to describing the property. So we've already bounded by, usually we do that bounding call by the whatever deed. So we bound it by the vesting deed. And then we get into identifying more particularly. So then we restate the said parcel, which is the one we were lying in, that parcel lying in, said parcel being that portion of said property. So this parcel we're describing being that portion of that property included, and then we have all these other bounds, including a strip of land variable in width. So this is a variable width description, and it lies easterly on the easterly side of the center line, which center line is described as follows. Now, anytime you mention the center line, or you're going to hold to a center line, or you're going to have a station variable width table, you have to define the center line. So that's why that comes next. You have to define the center line. So that would be, and it would be in a paragraph of its own. And usually we would do this in the first paragraph, which center line is described as follows. In parcel 2, we might say, if the center line is described already in a description, always refer back to it, unless it's a different center line. But just refer back to center line, to parcel 1, and I'll show you that later. The center line bounds, if applicable, reference to the center line of the highway and strip. So also remember that usually we put whatever highway we're describing the center line for, we usually have it as, say, relocated Salem, whatever highway it is.
Oh yeah, Paul, the other part is too, is like if, like in this one where it's a W center line, you spell out W center line and then everywhere in there, you're going to have W. So
yeah,
that way, you know exactly which center line, it's the same center line too. So if if you have more than one or it has a specific delineator, make sure and use it consistent throughout the document.
Yeah, and then so however it was recovered too. That's another thing I wanted to mention about center lines. Typically on our right-of-way map, the primary center line, sometimes there can be multiple primary center lines, but there's a primary center line, and usually we don't label it. It's just got a center line station without a label, unless like there's a northbound and a southbound of the same, you know. But usually the ones that are labeled are these are ramp center lines, or different than the prime. They're usually secondary. But sometimes there can be multiple primaries, and they do label them. And if that's the case, however they're recovered, that's what we want in our deed description. But usually the center line, the primary one, isn't labeled, and it's the secondary one.
Right. And this comes will come from the retracement survey or the recovery. And so since there's so many engineers on here, don't look at their plans because they always rename ours like RW and L or different things. So that's why you want to make sure which one you're talking about and then it matches consistent because plan sets may have different names on them.
Yeah, and the ones that I would depend on, if you're the surveyor that's not only writing the descriptions but is recovering the center line, then you know which ones to use. If you are writing the descriptions and you're referring to a recovered center line by ODOT or by someone else, use the however they recovered it is the one you're supposed to use. Anyway, but that's good. If there's a label to a center line, you need to have it wherever that center line is mentioned, even if it's in a strip description. It needs to be down below too.
A quick question for you, Paul.
Yeah.
Does the center line described have to encompass the entirety of the resolved center line?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now this varies. It depends on the project and it depends on the writer. But a lot of times what we would do is we would try to give station limits sometimes to describe alignment and not have it go, if it's a really long job, and we might do pieces of the alignment. But any alignment you describe should start with a tangent and should end with a tangent. You know, you want to go beyond your control points. And typically on a job, we put the whole center line in it. I mean, I would, just so that, and I would just write that description and then copy it over, and so that it's always consistent. But you can, if it's going to be confusing, and if the person has, if you want to limit it to a certain area or section, you could limit the center line, but usually I'd put the whole thing in.
Yeah, essentially Paul's saying it can be truncated, but be careful in truncating because you need to make sure that your calls lie within the station bounds of the center line that you have. Yeah. And make sure that you have a new tie to the beginning point of the stationing from the government corner, etc. Yeah. So you can truncate it, but be very careful and make sure that your acquisition stays within the bounds of that center line.
Yeah, that's good, Mike. Yeah, so you want to make sure that it covers it. And also, that's the other thing I'll just mention again. You want to start with a tangent and end with a tangent, so someone can recover it. So okay. Okay, there's another way too, not only to describe property with a bound, and it's not just the center line. Sometimes we use what's called a described line or a described track. Yeah, This was not really, but and we'll refer to, instead of the center line, we'll refer to a described track or it's a described line, and then we'll start, and it's consistently looks like this. And I just, because I keep forgetting to do this, but I'm going to go back to the manual and go back to one of these chapters, because all these examples are right here in this chapter, chapter 4. Here's an example of a center line, which center line is described as follows. And this is typically how they all look. They all start at a certain station. They all, this first station is referenced to a government corner. And then you proceed on a tangent. And then you go through spirals. And this is the way we like a spiral to look. Thence on a spiral curve, we like to say which way, right. This is one time we use right or left. And then the long chord, which bears south, blah, blah, so many feet. And this is what the actual feet along the alignment is, 200. And then on the so many foot radius curve right, the long chord of which bears. So all that information, this is the way we would show a station. If there, a lot of times in our alignments, there's a, what we call a equation station. And if it comes to an equation station, you need to put that in the alignment so that it's not dropped. So you would say the feet to engineer's centerline station, blah, blah, back equals blah, blah, ahead. Now, when you do an equation station, I don't like the people to put, you're supposed to spell out things, because this is the writing. You know, on the map, you can do abbreviations, do different things. But on the description, you need to write it as if you're reading it. And so that's why we like to say back equals, we like to spell out equals in ahead. And that's the way we like that to look. And then there's the radius. But I was going to go to the next one too, which is what we're talking about is the described line. That's in here too. This goes over to, see, there's a described line. Usually the body goes, the said parcel being that portion of said property line southerly of the following described line. There's a lot of different reasons to use a described line. It is a bounding call, because sometimes you can't do a strip description because a lot of the segments are going back on line, so there aren't really a segment. I'll show you that later too. But this is just a way we like to describe line to be looked at. And usually what we do is we call it out and we begin at a point and to a certain station. And then this is the way we like to say, you know, those offset calls, like a station offset call. We like to say it this way, and this is the way we've done it for a long time, ODOT. Thence easterly, we give a directional call, easterly in a straight line to a point opposite and 135 feet directionally of a certain station. Basically, it's just a station offset. But that's the way we like to write it. We're talking about a particular point that's opposite and it's so many feet directionally from a certain station. So, and that can go on and on. We always use, if you're going to go to a next point, station offset, you would write the same sentence, but you would give its opposite point and its station on whatever center line. So, and then because this station, this described line is referring to stations, you have to also define the center line. So then the next thing after this described line would be the center line of the relocated Corvallis Lebanon Highway is described as follows. And then you do a center line description, you know, of the center line you're referring to in the. Okay, then also in this chapter, there's a described track, which is the same thing as a described line, except it comes back on itself, so to the point of beginning. So you do the same thing and it reads the same way pretty much. but it's pretty consistent with the way we like to read it. But you can go to this chapter to kind of see how different examples of descriptions. Here's also an example of a meets and bounds description. There's an example of a access description. Basically, an access description is pretty much describing the vesting property. But we don't like to, so we don't confuse people. And if a property owner sees this, they think, well, you're buying my property. Well, no, we're just buying a right on your property. It defines their whole property, but we usually try not to put the area because then they might think, oh my gosh, you're buying their property. So, and here's a bounded by adjacent property example, entire taking of a parcel. See, this is what keeping it simple does. If a particular property that we were getting is just a lot and block, you know, that defines it already. That's, if you're going to do an entire taking, you might as well just describe that instead of just, you know. Anyway, and then there's a fee excess description, which you can define the property and accept out parcel one, and that would get you, there's only one parcel one on it. But there's an example, and there's an example on the railroad encroachment description. A lot of times the railroad descriptions, they have, we like to make them RR lines. Again, however it was recovered. Yeah, I might go over that more too. And then there's this thing. But let me go back to the talk. Are people tired yet? I definitely have to leave at 4:30, you guys. I'm sorry about that, but I have another meeting, and Mike might take over then. So you just got to be patient till 4:30. Okay, so yeah, that's some stuff we said before, beginning and ending with it. Okay, then we get into variable width tables. Now, usually up at the top, when you get into that situation, the said parcel being that portion of said property included in a strip of land, variable in width. So what that implies, when you have a variable width, sometimes you can have like 50 feet in width, and then you've got it already. You don't have to describe a table. But if you have a variable width, then this is the way we like it to look, and then you'll use that table. Now I'm going to go into this later to show you variable widths more intimately, so I'm going to wait on that. But and then after that, if you have some kind of bearings or something in this project, bearing distances, like see up there, you can barely see it. There was a north. You have to have in a bearing, base of bearing statement. Because where does that come from? And then that gets people into what bearing system you're on. You can call out the Oregon coordinate system. There's different ways of showing that. I'll show you in a minute where that is in the manual. They can be based on, you know, OCRS. They can be based on a survey. Let me go in the manual and show you the base of the bearing. Whoops. We'll get to here. There's ways we show it on the map, but there's also ways we show it in the description. Here's some examples. I guess that's on page 36. basically the variance statement. But there's different examples of how we show our basic variance statement. Usually it's the last thing we put in the description, except for the very last thing is the area. So anyways, quick way to look for things in the right-of-way engineering manual, this is all in there, is just to do a find. Let me go back to my anyway, so that's, and then the area statement is the very last thing. And then, like I said before, I'll mention again, every area we put in there, we put it to the foot. We put, if it's over an acre, we'll put acres to the 100. And we always put the statement, anytime we say an area, we always say more or less. Okay, this is an example I want to show you guys. Let's say the property went out to the center line. Their actual property did. But their deed calls it the center of the highway. Okay, the area statement, the parcel area statement, you should say it like this. This parcel land contains so many square feet, more or less, outside the existing right of way. Now, in our description, we call out all the way to the center line. So we are actually acquiring all the way out to the center line for whatever that is. But the area we give in the description is only this area, because this area is affected by right of way we already have, even though the underlying fee is theirs. This happens in cities a lot and stuff, or sometimes in the county, out the county. Sometimes their deed describes out to there, but we've already bought a piece, which is this next example. Their property went out to here, but in a prior file, we bought this from them already. The thing that's important about this, in the area statement, you'd say this parcel land contains so many square feet, more or less, because we already bought this, and it's just this that we described. Now, when we did in our description, I just wanted to note, we will describe this whole fee. We'll call it their piece, so it's bounded by their piece, which is only to here, and we will call out all the way to the center line. But because of that, we want to also accept out. This is one of those augmenting clauses, or not augmenting, but take away clauses. We will say accept this property, and we'll call out our deed and stuff. So anyway, but in the area statement, we wouldn't have to say anything. We'd just say more or less, because that's the only property we're purchasing. We already purchased this, and we'll describe this whole thing, but then we'll accept out this parcel we already bought from the description. Okay, this is a thing where their property goes out to the right-of-way line, the existing right-of-way line. They don't have any of this underlying fee, or it might be a lot or something that they have. And in this case, the way the area statement would just say, this parcel of land contains so many square feet, more or less, because that's what it is. Their property is only there, and we're only acquiring this red part. So it's important how you state the area. The main thing is this one, where we want to make sure that we tell them exactly what area we're talking about. What area that we're talking about, the whole area, because it describes out to there, but we're only going to say with the square foot of the area that we don't have some kind of right to already. Okay. And then I just want to mention again also this whole idea of qualifying clause. We're accepting things from the description above. We described parcel 1, and we defined it, and then we accept they're from like parcel 1 or accept something out of it. And if there's more than one accept, let's say we accept out parcel 1, but we also accept out some other thing that was not part of this parcel we described. If there's a case where there's more, then you just cap also accept and then go with it. You don't have to bold it, you just got to cap them. See, like this is accepting out a particular deed. And then the augmenting clause is the same way. And you have one and also. You know, when Mike and I do descriptions on when we're giving a bunch of our property back to the city or something, we're relinquishing it back, we will do a lot of these phrases. We'll start out with also, and then I'll have, sometimes I've had 50 and alsos, because we give them a parcel and then we give them all these little pieces of parcels that we don't need for the highway anymore. And also, just to let you know, when we do a relinquishment to a city, we've already negotiated with them that they're going to accept it. We won't relinquish to a city property that they haven't already made an agreement to accept, because we don't want to go through the hassle of describing property that they're not going to accept. So anyway, so and I just wanted to mention again, our preferred way of these descriptions is this centerline strip description, because what we want to define is ODOT's property, and this lends itself to this highway corridor stuff. And these are the standard types of descriptions that are strip descriptions: centerline strip, described line, described track. Oh no, these are types of descriptions, but our preferred method is the.
Yeah, Paul. So yeah, so that's when you kind of showed. So just jump in there just for a minute, Paul.
Yeah.
Quite a few of the people are the ones with the ADA stuff, and so we're in some pretty tight predicaments, and you're in some really odd, stuff dodging around buildings. The centerline description may not be the adequate one for some of those certain circumstances. So investigate some of these others and, discuss it with the team or with your right-of-way, your region surveyor you're working for. But use the manual for sure and make it match that. And if you can tie it to a center line or something like that, or a described line or a described track, you can use those. Especially for this ADA stuff, there's a lot of odd things out there. So there is options.
Yeah, and one that we've used a lot for, like, with that ADA stuff, a lot of times you're in the city and you're doing these little corners off of the property. And if that is all platted to be lots, you could describe it really easily by just calling out to the lot block and then just having a bounding line. But you got to make sure that they're all kind of lots and blocks in the area. Right, Mike?
Yeah, we can do like the one example I showed where you can go 5 feet or 6 feet or something from the southeast corner of lot 6 of block so-and-so of, said subdivision, things like that. Depending on the method and the configuration that you're trying to do it. So centerline isn't, the ideal thing for your situation, or strip description, I should say. Then use one of these other approved forms, and as long as it's one of the approved forms and it meets that criteria, you can use that. Meets and bounds is the typical within the private sector. It's just not a preferred one for ODOT. I have done some, but I've also at the same time tied it to a station and offset or something like that too, just because it fits our style better.
Right.
I have a quick question for you both. since buildings were mentioned earlier, what's your opinion of accepting buildings out of the description for ADA projects where the back of the walk and building face are common?
Well,
You can, I have done it in other ones. I mean, it's not a preferred thing. I mean, it can be, but you can, I would call it, if you want to call it a weasel clause, where you can say, you know, except there from any portion of said building or foundation that is within said described tract or something or described parcel. Just, you know, you could do a square footage, you could do, basically what it's saying is don't touch the building and don't touch the foundation. And I don't know exactly where it's at. So, I mean, there's a variety of those things. Try to get it as tight as possible, but you can put those augmenting clauses in there for legal purposes.
yeah, and also when you do your areas, that plus or minus kind of gets you out of the. But you want to tie in your building really good, but the plus and minus kind of gets you out of worrying that you're compensating enough for the area.
Correct.
Along with that, is it preferred then to do a described line along the face of the building?
Oh, I don't. Well, the problem is if you do a described line and you also negate the building, then which is it? I mean, and have we really located the building properly with the described line? I think it would be better to just, Mike can give his opinion, but to just accept the building out.
Yeah.
Where it's at.
The tough part is is there a spread footing underneath there that the sidewalk is on top of or portion? You know, has that building encroached into the right of way? There's a lot of things there. If we're trying to, you know, in the ADA thing, if we're trying to do down and dirty and not, you know, we're not doing fee right up against, if we're just doing a temporary easement or permanent easement for the sidewalk or something, you know, just say accept out the building, and basically that means don't touch the building and don't touch the footing or anything related to the building, you know, that sort of thing.
Because your described line might not really. We want to make the monument be the building, and we don't want to create a described line that might not actually be that monument.
Correct. There's a potential for that. That's kind of why we stay away from meets and bounds, because there's that potential for gap and overlap of other descriptions that come up against it. So you could do a described line, but then, you know, if it goes around a corner, then you got to say that portion of said property line southerly and northerly or easterly and westerly of said line. So they're, you know, kind of use discretion looking at that, and of course circumstances. Every circumstance is different. But if you're worried about a building, do an exception of the building, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, and the other thing is,
go ahead.
The other thing is, like, if you do a described line, it when you negate out the building, it works as, even if it went through the building is what holds as being the bound. You see what I'm saying? So I like the idea of, you could do a described line that even goes through the building and then accept out the building.
It's kind of like a bounding call or a false call.
It is.
And the building, the true location of where that building is at is actually the bounding call of part of that description.
Okay. So last question for this round of questions is, What about building overhangs? How should those be treated?
That is a whole nother animal.
We get a lot of encroaches of those.
There's a lot of encroachments and a lot of things like that. And they will be handled very differently. And usually the right-of-way agents and that kind of do that negotiation and that discussion. Because many of them have been built into the right-of-way illegally. Some, it depends. Now, if it's a highway over and across a city street, where the highway came after the platted city street and the city was incorporated, then ODOT only has curb to curb jurisdiction. And so then that overhang may actually be over the city's property or the city's jurisdiction and not ODOT's. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. So.
Yeah. That's another thing I want to mention when just Mike reminded me of that I wanted to say is right away is a lot of different flavors. Sometimes people think it's all the same, but there's a mix, especially in cities, different kinds of fee and underlying fee and permanent easements, or it can be a resoluted highway. A lot of times we don't even have a right-of-way map in a certain area because it was just resoluted highway through a city, and so anyway. And Mike talks about jurisdiction, which is not even right-of-way. It's just
So Paul talks about flavors, and so and you think of vanilla or chocolate or strawberry. And then I think legally they talk about a color of title, which kind of means, what level of true deeded right do you have is quote your color of title. And then when he's talking about jurisdiction, that's just saying that, hey, I own this, but I'm turning it over to you to take care of, and here's our agreement. So that's jurisdiction versus color of title. And as Paul likes, because he likes ice cream, then he does it by flavor of titles.
Well, also the thing about it, and we should go on, but the thing about the reason we have jurisdiction curb to curb when we've gone through a city is because when we acquired that highway, that section of road as being in the state highway system, the city, it was a city, and the city has not necessarily ownership, but what they have is like a city street. So usually in that situation, the property owners own to the center of that street, typically. And so they have the underlying fee. The city just has the right of a street because they all prayed for it, or they created a plat that created this street. And so the reason we have a jurisdiction and not ownership is because that is a city street that our highway happens to go through. And it became a highway, whatever it was, we get, but we get only a right of way. We get an easement through there, that city street easement, and we only get the jurisdiction to maintain the highway through that right of way. And then the city typically gets from the curb out to maintain. And they sometimes have ordinances where their property owner maintains it. The only thing else that would change that is if the city and the state made an agreement to do something different with that jurisdiction. But anyway, so I'm going to go on, shall I?
Yep, you're running out of time, boss.
Yeah, I got 4 minutes. Okay, the described center line. I kind of went over this already. starts out with a station, and it's always tied to a government corner, which could be a quarter section, a 16th, a DLC corner, a subdivision corner, a lot and block corner. Typically, when there's a project done with a lot of files, they usually tie some kind of PLS corner in the area and usually tie it to that. You can either do a north from and south from a particular corner, or you can also do a bearing and distance from a certain corner. And then it goes over the courses of the alignment and goes through all the curves. Like I said, it starts with the tangent, ends with the tangent. Okay, and there's an example of it. And also in the manual, you saw that one chapter that that has all those examples of the different kinds of descriptions. Oh boy. Okay. Where is that thing? Okay, so that's an example. And then also a center line, if it's in a particular description, it's usually described in parcel 1 if it's needed. And then from then on, it's parcel 1 is referred to. Like you could say referred to here, and it's described in parcel 1. But if there's any kind of station offset or a center line in the description, you need to define that. And then in the first parcel, if it's in there, or maybe it's only in the second parcel, but then if there's other parcels that refer to that same center line, you can just refer to the parcel that it's described in. And then also you can refer to a center line that's described in another deed. A lot of times we do that because what we don't want is to re-describe something and then get an ambiguity or a difference from the original description. So it's good to sometimes, if you have a description, that alignment that's in another deed that you want to call to, you can call to that deed. Described in, center line is described in, will be referenced in the parcel description. Okay. Which center line is described in that deed to the state of Oregon by Andrew Skinner. See, this is a way we define the state of Oregon a lot of times. But however it is defined in that deed is what you call out, and then you call out a deed information. Okay, and this is the way we do equations, remember. We spell out equals, we don't ever say equal. We don't have the equal sign, we spell it out in the description. And this is the way we do a variable width table. Now, when a description has a variable width table and there's an equation station, you know, that this strip goes through, we need to define that equation station. Otherwise, it could get really confusing because they might not consider it, and then they're off on station. So when you do that, you would just do it like this. You'd say from whatever station the strip goes to that equation station, and it looks like it's 52 feet southerly of the center line, that corridor, that segment, and then you do that equation station to the next station, and then it goes 52 feet at the equation station in the straight line to 30 feet. So a strip of constant width is, you don't need a station equation, you've got it already. Including a strip of land 40 feet in width lying on whatever side of the center line. That is a constant width strip. But if it's a variable width strip, you always have this variable in width, and you always have this after the center line description. But this one doesn't have a center line description because it's done in parcel 1. But after that, you would then put the variable width table information. And remember, like I said, that variable width table is actually in there with cells in the background. And I'm going to turn the paragraph off, but that's what it looks like. But so that's easy to fill out. I saw some descriptions come in where they tried to simulate this table with just tabs, and I think it's better to just use this one because it's easier, you can add to it. And, okay, so better keep going. Variable width table and the description can first be difficult to interpret. Okay, so this is, I'm going to go through the variable width table. This is a really good example to show you, because the variable width table and that whole concept is talking about segments. It's not talking about this line, you know, which is a described line. You could describe that one, but it's talking about segments. So, yeah. So the first part right here is going from this station to this station at this width, 40 feet. So it's a segment. And then the next one is a segment 2. It's going to be from this station, which is the same one as that, to this station. It's going to be this width. And then the next one, it's going to be from this station to this one. It's going to be 50 feet to 90 feet. And then the next one is that. 90 feet to 30 feet. And then, so it ended there because the property ended there and we didn't need to go on. But sometimes I think you would go on, but it takes in this. See, this one is from 1205.50 to all the way out to 1207, which is here. So the line goes all the way here, but the segment's only to here because it's only their property, because we've already bounded by this property. Anyway, so this is kind of a false call out here. So there's the whole thing. That whole strip description table defined this whole thing in segments. Sometimes people make the mistake of putting in the strip description, they'll say from here to here, it's that width, and then they'll go from here to here, and that's not right, because there isn't any kind of a segment from here to here. It's just, and you're going to get that in the next segment, because these are the same station. Okay. Also, usually it started that you go ahead online with these strip descriptions. You could go the other way and it would still work if you did it right. But usually we don't like to go back online. Remember that. Let's say this piece that we wanted to buy, there was this weird angle. Let's say it went up here and then went down here. Well, see, that would go back online, and so you couldn't really have the segment from here to here would be weird. Anyway. Okay, and this is how we like to describe line, like I showed before. Usually we do this point opposite 110 feet northerly of a particular station on the center line of the. Usually when you first call out a station, you always refer to where is that center line of, and usually it's of a relocated highway. And then from then on, you don't have to say anything, but if you could say the end station, or if it kept going on different stations, and every time you mention a station, you'd say, I've said center line. Anyway. And then you always want to, after you do a describe line, you always want to define the center line, either by referring to another center line in a deed, referring to a center line in the parcel above or something, or describing the actual center line. And then also you can do the describe track, like we said. And that just is a described line that comes in on itself. It's kind of like a meets and bounds, but it's the way we like to do it. And we usually like to do it with our station and points opposite a particular station. Now notice that we always go beginning at a particular station, of a particular center line of a particular highway, and then we go on a thing until we come back to the beginning. What was that, Mike?
I was gonna say, don't be late, Paul. You got a meeting.
4:36.
Yeah.
Okay. What I'm going to do,
I think you're
is-
pretty much the end, aren't you?
Yeah, I think I am.
Well, yeah, we've kind of talked about that.
Yeah, I think I'm done. I'm going to give it over back to Mike, and he can talk about questions, and he has other things to talk about.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, Paul is going to a PERS retirement meeting because he is retiring and leaving me. So that's why he is excited to get out of here.
Yeah.
So this
You guys
may
should
be
also-
his last presentation. We'll see. But thank you, Paul. I appreciate it.
Also,
all your
people
knowledge.
should realize that there might be a job over there.
That's
don't know
right.
that yet.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you,
See
Paul.
ya. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Audrey.
Thank you. See you later, Paul.
You need to get out of it. Say hi.
You're not muted yet, so don't swear.
You just go hover up near the top and it should pop down and there should be a stop share option.
Pause share.
I can also stop you.
Yeah, could you please get me out of here?
All right, I got you.
Okay.
All right. Bye, Paul.
Bye.
All right, thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. So, so I don't have anything extra to add to there. So, do we want to open up microphones for questions, or does anybody have questions that they didn't want to put into the chat, or anything else that they would like to have us show you real quick? If not, we can give you back 22 minutes of your life. Probably some of you are on overtime at this part or outside of your standard work hours. If not, I greatly appreciate everybody for showing up and participating. Any questions, let us know, please.
I've just given
have,
you all the ability
links
to
to
unmute
our-
yourselves.
Yeah, so give us questions, feedback. We'll probably send out a survey monkey just to see things we could improve. I will go through, it may be the end of the week, but I'll go through iLearn and get everybody registered so they can get their PDHs printed off or registered in iLearn. Any information, let us know, and I hope it helped. So I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Do you know when, Mike, you'll have the presentations posted online?
I'll have to get them just converted to PDFs, which I can do. Then we have to get, we potentially could have it by the end of the week. We have to get it over to those technical people that will attach them to our website.